So the course is called Suicide Prevention Awareness, and it's specifically written for the education sector. However, whatever service you work in, if it's involving children or young people, so any aspect of care and or education, this is applicable for you. And the examples that we're going to be talking about are real examples of incidents where children and young people and staff who work in those environments have taken their own lives. Now, ideally, this is a standalone course of 3 hours, and it would be deemed a level 1 course. But it's also a module that can be added on to our level 2 version, which looks at the adult sectors and is 8 hours. So this can either be a standalone level 1 course, or it's an add-on module to our level 2. It is registered with CPD, and so there's 3 hours of CPD points, so 3 points that you can claim in relation to this. Now, the idea is the more people we get to be aware of this topic, the more each workplace will start talking about it and establishing what practices they need to develop and action plans. And it's about then looking for the identification of vulnerable students by use of various tools, such as the Vulnerability Assessment Framework tool, also known as the VAF. Understanding common forms of suicide amongst young people and children, understanding what to do if you believe a student is suicidal, and the emergency response preparedness for discovering a student hanging or who's overdosed. Now, by the end of this 3 hours, you'll be able to provide an example of recent cases where students have actually died by suicide on education sites. You'll be able to provide an example of why this topic is a safeguarding topic for the education sector or the child sector to consider and start preparing for. Explain the first 2 most common forms of suicide, which is the same for adults and young people. Explain the ligature death triangle. Provide the average suicide rate per 100,000 population for the UK. Explain the Vulnerability Assessment Framework, so the VAF. Explain why robust medication management policies in schools, further education, any child sector is a significant factor for suicide prevention. And explain the emergency responses and considerations for finding a person who is actually hanging. And explain the emergency responses and considerations for finding a person who has taken an overdose. Now, just reminding you that all of this material is copyright. You as a delegate have all the materials to be able to use for yourself, but please do not reproduce it, exhibit it, distribute it, adapt it, or train others with this material, because doing so would breach copyright. What I want you to start thinking about is how many children or young people in your setting need help, and what are you as a workplace doing about it? Have you started doing anything about it? Are you thinking about this? The 2018 Good Children report involved 67,000 children in relation to asking of questions and assessments. And of the 14-year-old children that took part in that assessment, 22% of girls and 9% of boys confirmed that they were self-harming. Now, that's a lot of children then, young people. So if you think about that then into your setting, how many then do you think, and some of you will work in higher risk settings where you are working with a lot of young people who are known to self-harm. Others might be in mainstream sectors, such as, for example, secondary school, primary schools, and it's not really a topic which is high on the agenda. But transferring those figures into your sector as well, there's got to be some children and young people in your sector who are self-harming. And that self-harming can be by a variety of different ways. And again, we need to look at some of those issues for what can you do to try and identify these children and young people, and then support them and divert them to the professionals who can, because this is not making you a professional in relation to this. It's starting the topic, it's raising it, it's a level 1 awareness course. So looking at who your most vulnerable children are, we will highlight some children who perhaps have an increased risk. However, never assume that a child will not attempt to self-harm or take their lives, because a trigger can happen at any time for a person, and it can then push them into that decision making. Also think about, if it was to happen, if you did have a child who was vulnerable to making such a decision, what would be the vulnerable location on your site for that child to go to in order to self-harm or take their own life? And when we look at the ligature triangle, there's 3 parts to this triangle. One is the child's at the center, and then there's 3 parts. They need the opportunity without disruption in order to attempt to take their lives. Then they need the methodology, so they need the item, and then they also need the ligature point to attach it to. So if you can remove one of those factors, it's going to then significantly alter the opportunities for that child or young person to attempt a ligaturing event. Because at the end of the day, this course, we're looking primarily at ligaturing. We will mention other things like overdoses, but primarily this 3 hours is about ligaturing. What methodologies are favoured by different genders or age groups? Is there a difference between male and female? Is there a difference between an 8-year-old and an 18-year-old? You know, so we'll also look at some of the issues about gender and age groups. What consideration has your workplace given concerning staff in relation to suicide? Is there an opportunity on your site for a member of staff, if they wanted, to be able to self-harm or actually conduct a ligaturing event? So the contents of the course may be upsetting to some delegates, and we are going to talk about real cases with real names who really died. And we're going to look at news reports, we're going to look at coroner's reports. So for some delegates partaking in this course, it will be upsetting. It's essential that, because the topic is real, if you are triggered by anything in relation to this course, please discuss it with a suitable adult person in your workplace or at home. Please do not suffer alone. Help is there for you as well. Discuss this with your employer, with your line manager, with your colleague, whoever you feel is suitable to be able to talk to. But this is about safeguarding children and staff in education or young person settings from ligature events. And as we go through the course, there'll be presentations from myself, there'll be things for you to download and to read. There's also some knowledge checks as we go along. And by the end, you can then download your certificate, which is your level 1, 3 hours in relation to the children, either as a standalone course or in relation to an add-on module to the level 2 course.